First off, just want to thank everyone for jumping in. You guys, everyone in the audience that is, your mics are muted and your cameras are off. If you want to be a part of the conversation, there is a chat function, which the chat function, feel free to throw where you're listening in from or just, general comments. But then there is also a Q&A section. So if you have questions that you want directed towards Austin or Dudley, throw them in there. We have folks monitoring those, and we are compiling those questions, and we'll be asking them throughout. So feel free to throw questions in there. This webinar is being recorded. It will go up on the onX Hunt YouTube after this. So if you got to bail early or want to share it with a buddy or whatever, you can do so if you go to the onX Hunt YouTube channel. And then, there's a bunch of people in this webinar. So just please be respectful in the chats and the Q&As. We're going to get to as many questions as possible. If you have native nursery questions, also feel free to throw those into the Q&A. We got some Mossy guys answering them. If you got onX questions, we also have some onX folks in there answering those. So throw whatever you got at us. And then the last thing to cover before we kick this off is at the end of this webinar, we are going to be doing some giveaways. So we got 6 $50 gift cards to native nurseries. That'll be good for whenever and whatever you want to plant after learning a thing or two in this webinar. And then we'll also be giving away some onX hats for those that are sticking around to the end. So stay tuned and we'll keep you posted on how you can make sure to get entered in those giveaways. So without further ado, we got Dudley Phelps, who is on your right, and Austin Delano, who is on your left. They're both here with Mossy Oak. So guys, why don't you introduce yourselves and kind of tell them what you do at Mossy and why we're here to talk about land management, trees, and food plots.
Austin, you want to start?
Sure. Yes, sir. Austin Delano, been here since 2007. I work at our biologic and gamekeeper brands, work on product development, research and development. And like Dudley, we stay on the phones all day answering questions from soil test to what should I plant here, prescribed burning questions, you name it. We catch a little bit of it every day. So no 2 days are the same and always a full plate every day. So we get to do what we love.
Yeah. I'm Dudley Phelps. I started at Mossy Oak in 2007 as well. Came up here to go to grad school and just kind of stuck around. But I do a lot of the similar stuff to what Austin does, but my focus is he's more kind of on the food plot side of things. We both do overall habitat stuff. I kind of lean more towards the tree side of things, but that's basically it. We're a pretty good team on the habitat stuff.
And it's feeling pretty weird now. It's like a 15-year team.
Yeah.
Those are the good ones, the ones that have longevity to them. So, all right, well, we'll kind of move into the first topics that we had laid out for this evening here. And first, we're just going to cover the Mossy Oak onX Hunt partnership. So we're stoked to be partnered with Mossy Oak, and what you guys get as an elite member, as being that with onX, is you get 20% off the Mossy Oak store. You get special discounts on native nursery products, as well as the free Gamekeeper digital magazine. So ensure you guys are taking advantage of that stuff as onX elite members. Mossy Oak provides so much value to you as an outdoorsman, whether it's through Camo or the native nurseries branches. Ensure you're taking advantage of those benefits. But now we're going to kick it off with tree plot planning. So Dudley, I know this is kind of your specialty, your zone. And there was a number of very common questions that were emailed in on the registration of this. So I'll kind of throw those to you, and then you can take it, from there on deciding what to plant, site selection, maintenance. But fruit trees were a hot topic in the questions. And then also, what's like the highest value improvements that you can make on your property? And I figure there are definitely some trees that fall in that realm. So I'll let you take it away on tree plots, Dudley.
Okay. Well, I'm talking to a really broad audience here. And so mainly the first thing I like to drive home is that, you already have some habitat in place. You've got some trees in place. And you really want to just make mental notes when you're going out to your land. Figure out what you're missing. ask yourself that question. You may already have a lot of bur oaks on your land, dropping acorns at a certain time of year. And so that's kind of the biggest thing is finding what the lowest hole in the bucket and then fill those holes as you go. And don't try to do it all at once. But yeah, so if you've got bur oaks that are dropping acorns just about every year in late September, you may want to plant something else that drops at a different time. And I know that's not very specific, but I'm talking to folks from all over the place. So like if you're in the Southeast, up into the lower Midwest, you can do, we've got Nuttall oaks, Shoemart oaks. They drop a lot later in the year. One of my biggest selling points is when your food plots have been eaten to the ground and they're lip high, some of these late dropping oaks are just starting to drop. And so that's kind of a big deal.
So Dudley, with some of those oak trees, obviously it takes a long time for an oak tree to mature. What are some options for folks that they want to see a quicker turnaround window from planting to mass production? What are some options for those folks in, be it oaks, be it persimmons or other fruit trees? What's something that can, create a difference for you in the shorter term?
Well, I think a lot of our mindset is a bit wrong. We've been reading these old textbooks for years, and they're all based off of a seed falling out of a tree and that parent tree falling over and that one seed sprouting and becoming a little bitty tree and making its way up to the very top of the canopy really slowly. And then it finally starts getting enough sun and it spreads out. And, it might be 25 years before an oak makes a crop with that, natural method. But if you were to create an opening or plant a tree in an existing opening, even a small seedling, you use the tree tubes, you do some weed control, some fertilization, that same tree, for example, a Quercus alba white oak that the textbook says is going to take 25 years. I've seen acorns on those in as little as 7 or 8. You just have to be willing to put them in the right site and baby them, and they'll pay huge dividends in no time. But there's others, there's some species that drop at a younger age. Some of the natives, chinkapin oak, I've seen them make acorns as young as 3, believe it or not. In the deep South, you've got live oak. But up north, swamp white oak. There was a study out of the University of Missouri where they were getting acorns on them when they were 5 and 6 years old. But again, they were planting them on a good site and maintaining them properly and pushing the growth. And you only have to do that a few years. And once it's producing and happy, it maintains that for a while.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a key point to not let people think that, it's going to be 15 and 20 years before they're seeing any mass production, or whether it be soft massed. Some of the plums and pears I planted on my place will probably definitely be making this year. And this is their 4th growing season.
Oh yeah.
And that's a pretty common thing, but anywhere I've planted those, definitely by the 5th year, you're already starting to see single clusters of fruits on those, it really just drives home that you don't have to wait 15 years before you start seeing some results from the impacts you're making on your habitat. So don't go into it thinking only your grandkids are going to see the benefits.
Yeah, and that's a common phone call. I'm doing this for my grandkids. I'll never see these produce. And I'm like, hold on a second. Let's talk about that. Red mulberry is a soft mast tree. I know you see raspberries and blackberries in the store. They're not really that closely related. This is a tree, but it drops a similar looking fruit. They can make fruits when they're 3 years old. And I know it's turkey season right now, but they can actually drop fruits at the tail end of turkey season in some states.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there are a bunch of questions around fruit trees. And I know, Austin, you just mentioned, pear trees. We got the mulberries, the red mulberries there. What are some other fruit trees and soft mass trees that folks can use to, increase food for their turkeys and deer?
I would say overall, crab apples are very popular. They're not as popular in the Southeast, but there's some native varieties or species that I think we've been overlooking over the years that can do better. They tend to be a little disease prone in the Southeast, but you get outside of the Southeast and just about anywhere in the US and even Canada, apples and crab apples are the way to go. But there's so many others, American plum, Chickasaw plum, Mexican plum, red mulberry, black cherry.
Black cherry is a great one.
Yeah.
Very overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
Persimmons are just
in over the years, it seems like we've kind of narrowed it down to these very few species. And now we're starting to realize that the diversity is where you're going to win, by planting a few of each. But yeah, if there was one to pick in most parts of the country, except the Southeast, I'd go crab apple. In the Southeast, I'd probably say persimmon.
As far as just being so adjustable to different sites, uplands, lowlands.
Yeah, I've seen them growing down near cypresses and bottoms, and I've seen them growing up on the most eroded ridge top.
Dry fence rows. I mean, they just seem to be so resilient to a lot of different sites.
I think that's awesome anecdotal information, and exactly what, a lot of this audience is after is, those trees that are going to produce for anybody. And so with that, like crab apples, for instance, is that a tree that you can, for the most part, plant it and forget about it and it's going to do its thing? Or, how much are you caring for some of these fruit trees, some of these oak trees that you're planting? Because, I'm sure a lot of these folks, it's not necessarily out their back door. They might have to travel to their lease or their property, however far away. What's the care for some of these things look like if you want them producing in that much tighter time frame?
Yeah. So, Austin, he basically hunts in his backyard. My place is about 2 hours away. So we do management in different ways, just like all of these listeners. But one thing that we have going against us is the very animals that we're trying to grow these fruits for are going to rub their antlers all over them. They're going to eat the plants, and they're going to keep them set back. And so we both agree on this. Folks will, they want to do everything at once. And I suggest coming up with a 5-year plan, plant maybe 20% of the plants that or trees that you wanted to plant a year for 5 years. And that gives you time to maintain them and baby them. So yes, if you're planting trees, you can use those tree tubes. It's like a cylindrical, plastic cylindrical tube. You plant your tree, you drive a stake, you put the tree tube around it. That'll deter deer from rubbing their antlers. It'll keep rabbits from chewing on them in the winter, mice. And you can also use that tube if you're spraying weed control around your seedling. You can kill unwanted grasses like fescue that suck the life out of your tree while it's trying to grow, and make them grow a lot faster and produce younger. But you can plant a larger amount and walk away and hope that some of them make it. But
we've kind of always had the saying that, if a guy calls and he wants to order 250 trees with no tree tubes, we would rather him order 75 trees and tree tube them all, just because of the protection factor, the rabbits, the deer chewing on them, the deer rubbing on them. It just seems like a cheap piece of plastic from a 100-yard view, but just from the ones I've put on my place, I will never plant a tree, whether it be soft mast or hard mast, from the seedling stage without one. It's just,
no, if you use a tree protector, or if you don't want to do that, you can use some type of cage. You're going to have a mature tree someday. If you don't, chances are you won't.
So you guys would say the single most important tool is a tree tube, not watering, not fertilizing or doing some other type of nourishing for that plant, but a tree tube.
Well, there's negatives with tree tubes. And if you don't use fertilization and you don't do either weed control or mulch, it's going to kind of block the sunlight, and then the weeds will rob it from moisture and nutrients. So if you're going to use the tree tubes, you also have to actively manage them and give them those treatments that they need. Otherwise, they're a waste. You can use a cage or something like that, but anything to keep mainly deer off of your plants until they're mature enough to produce a crop, or the tree outgrows it and sloughs it off. Once it gets really big, maybe if you're in Iowa or something, they'll still rub it. But in most parts of the country, the tree gets about 6 inches in diameter or more. They tend to go to smaller trees.
Makes sense. I like it. So I think from there, as far as best practices on getting these trees into the ground, does that vary by tree species? Is it pretty standard that, depending on where you're at in the country, this is when you should be putting them in the ground, non-native versus native, things to avoid? What does that look like as far as getting trees in the ground and doing so successfully?
So timing is important. The trees we grow are a containerized tree. And so if you're getting bare root seedlings from a nursery where there's no soil attached to the root, timing is even more critical. If you've got a containerized seedling like we have at Native Nurseries, there's soil around the roots. So that's insurance. There's moisture in that soil, there's nutrients in that soil, so they're more forgiving. But generally in the South, and I always say Southeast instead of the South, but in the South, if you know your planting zones, generally 7 and south, I want folks to plant as soon as trees are at peak color and dropping is when you start planting trees. And then you can plant throughout the winter, depending on where you are, into April, probably mid-April or so. And you don't have to provide any other inputs. If you're getting them in the ground then, and you have a relatively temperate environment, you're getting 30 inches or more of rainfall a year, you plant that seedling, you tube it, you do your weed control and fertilization, you shouldn't have to water it. Up north, the planting window is a bit smaller. It's in the fall. So I know most folks are thinking, oh, that's during the rut, but leaves are at full color and dropping. That is a great time to plant. And then you start getting a lot of freezes and the ground freezes. You physically can't plant a tree in frozen earth. So you have to wait until the ground thaws out in the spring to start planting again. A lot of people wait until the spring, but I think folks should start at least trying to plant some in the fall and getting a feel for it. The theory is those trees can root in over the fall and the winter, and they'll grow that much more the following spring and summer because they've got a more developed root system compared to a spring planted tree.
Interesting. So generally speaking, no matter where you're at, kind of the fall time zone before it really starts to freeze up is when you want to get those trees in the ground.
And that's a non-traditional time to plant. Most people, we've been the bare root seedling industry has trained us to think that we have to wait until the spring to plant because they have to wait until the ground is thawed before they can dig those to ship them. But now that containerized seedlings seem to be much more of a new thing, that drastically broadens your window, and that gives you that opportunity to plant in the fall when you're starting to get a few rains. The leaves are falling off the trees and they're not needing moisture. They're not actively drinking as much.
And the overall survival rate of containerized, it's a pretty big difference between that and bare root. So people can expect to get 10 out of 10 trees to survive instead of hoping for 50% or whatever.
Right. Can you guys just explain that in layman's terms as far as the containerized tree that you're purchasing versus a bare root tree?
Yeah. So bare roots, are started by seed. usually out in the field. So it's probably some, think of a big row, big wide row, and a machine that looks like a no-till drill is planting all of those acorns or whatever in that hipped up row. And, they come up an inch away from each other, and, they fertilize it, they water it, they grow to, I don't know, 18 inches or so in height. They actually run this big blade under the row that severs the taproot, that encourages it to have a few more feeder roots instead of one long taproot. And then they go dormant in the winter. And then as soon as the ground thaws, the nursery is able to pull them up, and bag them and box them and ship them to their customers. But it's just a root with no soil attached. So they're very sensitive to drying out before they're planted. And you just have them, and they have a much smaller root system. So they've been working for years. That's kind of the OG tree seedling. But they're not nearly as forgiving. And there's a saying about planting trees that came along with bare roots. Do you know that saying?
No.
Year one, they sleep.
No.
Year two, they creep. And year three, they leap. So the bare roots, year one, they just sit there. They're trying to establish a root system. Year two, they've got a little bit of a root system, and they grow some. Year three, they have a good root system, and then they jump or leap. Whereas a containerized seedling, it already has a really good fibrous root system. And those little bitty root hairs, think of it as a mop versus a stick. The fibers of a mop are going to soak up a lot more moisture and nutrients compared to a stick, which is what a bare root seedling is. And so those little feeder root hairs are able to soak up moisture and nutrients much more quickly, with less transplant shock. And they're off to the races in year one, especially if you baby them.
Yeah. And for the landowner, whether you've got 20 acres or 2,000, regardless of how big of a place you're managing, your feeling of accomplishment and that you're doing something right when you plant those, say in January, February, and then you come in there in April and the tree is budded out. You've got leaves, even though it's an 18-inch tall seedling to start off with. And then the very next year it's 4 foot tall and it's out of the tree tube and it's exploded with growth. That's a big deal.
Yeah. It's fun to see them. A lot of times they'll pop out of the top of that 4 foot tall tree tube by June or July of that first year.
It really is impressive to see, because we used to get questions a lot. Why don't y'all sell in bigger 3-gallon pots, in 5-gallon pots? And the truth is, we can put these things side by side and just watch it outgrow one that has been in a 5-gallon pot.
And you're spending a lot of time digging a bigger hole, a lot more maintenance. You're likely going to have to water that larger sapling through the first summer. So we think we found that happy medium with the seedling. And not everybody can afford containerized seedlings. If you get on some government program where you've got to plant 500 acres of trees, that's just not very feasible. But most of us are what we consider, the weekend warrior type. It's going to plant a few trees a year, and containerized seedlings are the way to go. Even we hadn't gotten into wildflowers and grasses, but plugs or containers seem to be the way to go. You mentioned native versus non-native earlier. That's a bit of a controversial topic. I think we're in pretty much agreement on that. We like to plant natives when we can. I don't necessarily want to be the native only snob. I feel like I'm running people off by doing that, but I encourage people to plant mostly natives when they can. They seem to house more insects. For years, we always thought that these trees we were planting are dropping a seed or a fruit or a nut or something that animals eat, but they also provide, above ground habitat for things like butterflies and moths. Oak trees can hold up to, I think, over 500 different species of moths and butterflies. And, what do baby birds eat? They eat larvae of butterflies and moths. They don't eat seeds.
Yeah. It's just more of, creating diversity on your place.
And, non-native plants don't normally attract a whole lot of insects. They were chosen for that reason. People plant non-natives in their yard and things because they're pretty, and they're easy to maintain. But as gamekeepers, we kind of like the fact that insects are using our trees and plants. And so that's kind of a new thing, and it seems to be catching steam. So that's our answer to that.
Right on. I love it. And so this question has come up a couple times, and maybe you can speak to some other general, broadly overarching soil types. But, these trees that you've mentioned, the question was for areas with rocky or sandy or just poor quality soil. Are these same tree types that you guys have been mentioning between, persimmons, crab apples, these types of mulberries, and then these different types of oak trees, are they pretty adept at, growing wherever, or do you got to be pretty particular if you have some poor quality soils, and really pick and choose your trees?
I think, it's, if you're a fly fisherman and you're flying ties, you're going to match the hatch, right? And you need to do the same with your site. So
look at what you already got.
Right. You can probably explain that some.
Well, I take my place, for instance. You dig 6 inches and that's about all the topsoil we have. It's pretty thin, and you hit what we refer to as chert rock, which is very gravelly, a little bit of sand. And if you get down low enough, you get a little bit of clay.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it the same at the bottom versus the top?
It does change a little bit,
yeah,
but it can be very well drained, but it's not infertile, because a lot of people take soils that are hard to work and are kind of ugly to our eyes as being infertile, but that's not always true. And so I've planted at least 6 species that we have at the nursery at my place, and they have flourished, some on upland sites, some on bottomland sites. The soil is not a lot different, but it drains different within those sites. So you do have to pay attention to where you're putting these, that it's not on a spot that gets absolutely, is super high and it's not going to receive any standing water at any time. And you also don't want to put it somewhere where it's going to be keeping its feet wet 9 months out of the year. So, but look at what you already got. Look at what the habitat that you're looking at putting it in is already sustaining, and try to match that somewhat. So they are pretty, I think they are very resilient.
They are. But there's
soil types.
Yeah, there's some instances where I think I mentioned Iowa earlier, or Illinois, or some of those places in the Midwest where it really doesn't matter where you are. The site, the soils are just great. But some places, you get down to a bottom of a hill where there's deeper soils that can hold more moisture. There's that's the good spot where everything will do well. But you get on top of the hill, you may have to be more choosy about what you plant. Or you get to an area that just stays wet, you're going to have to be more choosy about what you plant. And that's more important. You go to places in Texas, the Edwards Plateau, the Blackland Prairie, the Hill Country. It's going to be very site specific. If you want to plant, one of our trees that grows fast, you're going to need to be down by that creek where soil is accumulated and you're in a little river bottom. If you were to go up on top of a rocky hill, something may not last more than a month up there. And so it really, again, it just depends on the area.
Climate and region is a big
for sure. And so, I'm trying to think of another place. Washington State, that's way away from here, but there's a lot of variation. You've got that huge valley. I never can pronounce it properly, where a lot of agricultural crops are grown, and it's one of the most forgiving soils and climates in the country. But you go east of there where, it may be a lot drier. There's going to be a lot of variation based, what you can plant down near a creek versus what you can plant on top of a hill.
All right. So that means you guys will be dropping your phone numbers to take calls from all parts
exactly.
of the country.
Yeah.
Love it. So one good question that I did see come up, just because we touched on them quite a bit, tree tubes. What is the process as far as when you remove a tree tube from a tree, or how does the life cycle of the tree tube work if you're going to tube your trees?
Gotcha. Tree tubes, the plastic has a, like a UV component in it that makes them last longer while they sit in the sun. And usually they last about 4 to 6 years before they start getting brittle. But 4 to 6 years also coincides with the diameter of the tree. And it's going to start, the tree is going to be 4 to 6 inches in diameter in 4 to 6 years, most likely. And it's going to start splitting it lengthwise. At that point, I usually just go ahead and finish splitting it all the way down. And then I leave that tree tube on there for buck rub protection as long as I possibly can. Now, if you're in like a yard or something where you don't want to have to look at a plastic tree tube and you don't have any deer problems, you can remove the tube as soon as the tree is able to hold itself up. But usually I remove the stake at about year 2 or 3, and then I just leave the tube on as long as possible, because you never know when some buck is going to just tear into it.
Thrash your tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They all pick out the odd tree too.
Oh, yeah.
If you're in a pine plantation, they'll find the first oak, and they'll rub it and they'll scrape underneath it and vice versa.
Right.
So it seems like anytime you put these trees out in a specific location with the mindset of trying to get them to grow, they will find them and they will target them. And
Right.
like you mentioned earlier, they seem so insignificant, but the first thing you see at them a lot of times without a tree protector is going to be a rabbit at the bottom chewing on it.
Yep.
It's just, they're worth their weight in gold to me. And I just hardly won't plant one without it anymore.
All right. So we're going to do one more question that I actually came up with. You guys have talked about, understanding what trees already exist on your property. You guys are obviously very capable of doing that without any aids. But for folks that don't necessarily know their tree species, what's a resource they can use or an app they can use when they're in the field trying to understand what some of these tree and plant species are and determining, is this a high value thing or something I should get rid of? What's a resource folks can use to just learn?
Yeah, without a doubt, man. I would say on a state by state basis, your local forestry commission is probably going to have some literature. They're probably going to have a book. I know when I was in forestry college, we had one specific to Northwest Alabama, so a lot of those overlap in the areas that touched us everywhere, but I still have that book.
Yeah.
It's black and white, but we learned everything we needed to learn out of that book because it told you, what was the undesirable hardwoods or low quality stuff, what was the high quality stuff. And then all the species within those. So I would touch base if it were me with the local forestry commission and ask them what resources they have on identifying native trees in your area. Because it can be very, like you talk about, if you were in the foothills of Texas, what they have there is very different from what you're going to see in West Virginia. And so you definitely want to be very specific about where you're getting, because of some of the naturally occurring hybrids we see. There's so many variables in that, but
so just about all of your land grant universities are going to have some kind of publication. I know Mississippi does. It's called Mississippi Trees, put out by Mississippi State. There's a new app, Toxa uses it. It's called Picture This, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it works really well. Google Photos. I was shown something that Google has that just has a built-in algorithm. The more people use it, the more accurate it gets. I just, I learned in school and just being obsessed. But one thing, what you can do is you can learn about sight. So you can narrow it down. So when we were in school, they have what's called a dichotomous key. And it'll say, is the leaf pointed or lobed? If lobed, go to number 3, and then you'd go to number 3 and it would say, is there a tuft of hair in the leaf axil? And you would see that it didn't have it. So then you would go to another one and it would be nut all oak. that's really the best way to do it. If you want to get really down and dirty and get the specifics, a dichotomous key. I like to narrow it down. So trees that grow down in a bottom that naturally occur like along a creek are going to differ from the tree species you find up on top of a rocky hill. And even halfway down the slope is going to be different. Or the direction it faces, like a north facing slope, it doesn't see that south leaning sun during the day. And so that's naturally going to have a little bit more moisture there. So different species occur there. So what you can do is learn to understand your varying site types in your area. And if you're on top of a hill and you see a tree and you're like, I don't know if that's a black oak or a cherry bark oak. Well, if it's on top of a hill, it's likely a black oak because they naturally occur further up the hill, and cherry barks occur further down. So that's something that's real important, is understanding your site and knowing how to narrow it down. And, don't always try to look, if it's wintertime, you can look down for clues, look at the leaves, go through the leaves and see if there's any acorn cups or old acorns. And
that's pretty critical, I think, when you start looking at individual white oak species or individual red oak species for guys too. I mean, a lot of times, even if it's in the fall and you're, hanging tree stands, whatever you're doing, you're looking up, you're like, well, it kind of looks like this type of white oak, but I'm not real sure. You can narrow that down by getting underneath there, scraping off the leaves, finding some caps from last year's acorn crop to help you narrow it down into, using Google pictures, a lot of different resources out there for narrowing it down, even within a species like a white oak.
And I'll add that you can use your onX app at, we did a video about this a couple of weeks ago where, if you find one tree that you like, it may be a southern red oak that dropped really heavily. Well, if it's on a south facing slope and you can see that topography line, you can follow that line at that same elevation and find that little point of a ridge that may be half a mile away, but it's the same elevation, it's a similar slope, and it's the same aspect. It's facing the same direction. Then you're likely to find that tree there as well. Pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, just learn how to narrow it down. That's my biggest take home point. Narrow it down by the site it is.
Awesome. Well, we're about halfway through here, maybe a little over. So we're going to kind of transition from tree focus to some more food plots. Be it, a very much curated food plot, from seed, or a more natural, 4B grassland food plot. Austin, I know food plots are kind of your specialty. So as far as food plot planning, if you're in the stages of creating a new food plot or revamping, be it site selection, be it soil testing to understand what you should be planting, or soil amendments that you need to make in order to plant what you want to plant to attract deer when you want to attract them. Can you walk through some of your process when you're planning and prepping a new food plot site?
Yeah, for sure. And what you mentioned, soil testing, I mean, we harp on it, but it takes so many of the guessing and questions out of what you have and what you don't have.
And it's the cheapest thing you can do.
That $9 you spend will tell you so much that can help you avoid so many mistakes.
And where can you spend those $9 to get your soil test?
Yeah, if you just jump on Mossy Oak Biologic or just type in Mossy Oak Biologic soil test, it's going to pop up. We make it super simple. You'll have your results back in like 3 days after shooting it to them. You'll have it in an email PDF form right there at your hands. And you can be very specific about what you're planning to plant. And it's so the results are going to come back specific to not only your soil and what it does and doesn't have, but also specific to what you say that you're wanting to plant. And so that can really help narrow it down. The biggest thing that we try to stress to people is that soil test is going to tell us what your current pH level is and your current macronutrients, what you're needing as far as phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, and where your soil lays on the pH scale. And it's so critical to know that where we're sitting right here, if we were to go down the road to one of these open fields and take a soil sample in this particular spot of Mississippi, it's likely going to come back 6.5 or above, because this is a very unique area with alkaline soils. 98% of the rest of the area east of the Mississippi is not that way. It's going to be 5.5 and below.
So can you dive into those pH levels a little bit, just so we all have an understanding, like what is a desirable pH?
Yeah, so almost all food plot species that we're planting are going to do their best. They're going to grow their best. They're going to uptake nutrients best, usually in the 6.2 to 7 range. I really like seeing stuff in the 6, just shoot for 6.5 is my goal. If I get a little bit above that and go towards 7, great. But we're really trying to focus on that 6.5 area, because slightly acidic is not bad. We're not trying to get everything to neutral, but 6.5 in that general range. And so the closer you can get your soils to there by adding lime when it says you need it, the more your plants are going to be able to uptake nutrients, the more disease resistant they're going to be, the more resistant they're going to be to droughts and other stressors. The plants are going to flat out taste better to animals because they're able to uptake more nutrients. And so a plant that's not stressed out, a plant that's able to uptake not only nutrients that are already in the soil, but ones that we add through amendments like fertilizer, it's just going to be a stronger, healthier, better tasting plant. And if you're going to the trouble and the time and the expense of planting food plot, then do it right. Take the first step, test the soil, figure out what you do have and what you don't have, because some places are not going to need 120 units of phosphorus per acre.
Right.
Some are. So when you start looking at all the different fertilizer blends out there, everybody's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to get. I don't know what these numbers mean. That's what that soil test will tell you. And when you still don't understand it, you call me and then I'll walk you through it, because we want you to put in the soil what it needs. We don't want you putting in there what it doesn't need. We want to get it to the right levels. We're not trying to grow row crop grade yields here. We're just trying to grow solid, productive food plots for our wildlife. So that's what that soil test is going to help us figure out, is what you do need and what you don't need, specific to where you live at, specific to what you're trying to plant.
I'm going to intervene here. I had a field that unknowingly got down to a pH of 5.5 this season, and I was bragging about how good my brassica crop looked. I even top dressed it with nitrogen like y'all recommend, and it was looking good. And then it started getting cold, and it was like it died overnight. Yeah. And that's when the time of year when you really need that food plot to thrive. But because I didn't apply lime to that field, and the pH got down to 5.5, it petered out before it was even really needed.
Yeah. That's probably one of the areas you see the quickest drop off.
The other fields that had the proper pH, they stayed green throughout the winter.
So there's questions that came in, and that brings it up as well there, Dudley. If you have a pH, below that 6, below that 6.5, and you have to apply lime, is that something that you're going to have to look at doing multiple times a year, once every couple of years? What's that procedure look like?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables in that, but generally speaking, you're not going to have to apply lime every year once you get it up into that desirable range. Okay, so there's different grades of lime. When you buy agricultural limes, we call it, which is powdered lime, there's different size that they run through the screen at the quarry. So the bigger the particle size, the longer it's going to take to break down within the soil, vice versa. The smaller the size, the quicker the results you're going to see, the quicker it's going to be able to start neutralizing that acidity, but it may not last quite as long. But the variables within that are the type of soils you're applying it to, how porous and how well drained they are, the amount of rainfall you see. If you're in an area with 65 inches of annual rainfall and very porous soils, you may have to apply lime every couple of years. Vice versa, I've seen some areas with super heavy clay that's 5.5 pH. You get the lime, you get the pH brought up into the 6.5, 7 range, and it stays there for what seems like years and years and years, because it's not leaching through the soil profile in that heavy clay like it would a very well-drained rocky type soil. So we use the word variable a lot because there's so many differences between soil types, climates, rainfall. But generally speaking, you do not have to add lime every single year. Mm-hmm. We do recommend, if you get a soil test back and it says I need 3.5 tons of lime per acre because your pH is 5.2. Don't try to add it all the first year. Your soil just simply cannot digest the sheer amount of lime that you're going to put out, but rather make a 3-4 year plan about adding 1.5 tons a year, whatever you can afford to put out there, and work it in the soil. Make sure it's not just laying on the top, and then work it in so that it can start doing its job, because lime doesn't break down overnight. It takes, months for it to start really showing up on a soil test and doing its job. So it's kind of like planting a tree. We want you to do it yesterday so that you can start seeing the results as soon as possible.
Yeah. And there's different, he was hitting on, there's different types of lime. You may have a small field that's tucked away that you can't, a lot of times you have to use this agricultural equipment like a lime buggy to spread it. Well, at my place, my roads aren't wide enough to get that equipment in there.
Or too muddy.
Yeah. So there's different ways of doing it. I would suggest just asking a local farmer how they do it. Some places, the quarry's nearby, and they'll just bring like an 18-wheeler and dump it. And then you can rent the buggy and have somebody fill it up. Some places you can go to the co-op and
Buy a full buggy loaded.
Buy a full buggy loaded, and you just borrow or rent their buggy and pull it with your buddy's diesel truck, and then you can put it out with the truck or your tractor. There's also pelletized lime. It's almost like a powdered lime that's been glued together into the size of fertilizer prills.
Really good for small plots.
Yeah,
that are unable
it's a little bit more expensive, but you can buy it in 40 or 50 pound bags. Even if, and that's the thing is most people just default and get the fertilizer when the lime is really the most important part.
What's the claim that we've had on our pH fertilizer bag since the beginning? Basically, at a 5.2 pH and lower, which is a very common pH. Don't feel like you're in a boat by yourself if you've got a pH that's that low. You're losing over 50% of added fertilizer at almost anything below a 5.5 pH, meaning that your plants are unable to use that until you get that pH level brought up. It's not just going away, but it's basically locked up in the soil. So your phosphorus, your potassium, the things your plants really need for growing roots, for expanding, and for grabbing other nutrients in the micronutrient circle, it's just not able to do those at the capacity it could when that pH is brought up closer into that 6.2 and up range.
So moral of the story, do it.
Soil test.
Yeah. So bottom line, everybody on this webinar has already gone to Mossy Oak Biologic, ordered their $9 soil test. Austin, what's your next step as far as, let's say they're looking to plant spring plots here, what's your strategy going forward to figure out what you're going to put in, this time of year, and how you're going to phase that out to plant your fall plots, based upon, maybe when you want deer there. Kind of walk through the next steps after the soil test as far as getting a food plot going.
Yeah, I think that's something we deal with every day on the phone. Is guys are like, okay, I'm gonna plant soybeans this year, this spring and summer for my deer. Then what do I do for the fall? Well, it's totally dependent on how big of a plot are you planting. Are you planting a 10-acre field, or is this going to be a 1-acre field? Because if it's a 1-acre field and even a moderate deer density, you're probably not going to actually make any soybeans. You're planting a crop that's going to do them some good and definitely provide nutrition through the spring and the summer, but you're probably not going to make a lot of actual soybeans that are going to carry you through the fall and the winter.
Right.
So you're going to need to make a plan for some sort of cool season annual to follow that up. Vice versa, if you're planting some larger fields or you have lower deer density that you can actually sustain the browse pressure and you're going to make beans, then you can start looking at that crop as actually being part of your fall and winter food plot program, because it's still going to be some food value there.
Yeah, so you leave it standing,
right,
and then you can overseed something that's going to turn green on the ground.
I think it's really highly overlooked because it's not traditional. You're not turning the ground over with a tiller or a disc, but if you have standing beans and have made a decent crop, or you can buy a 1 or 2 acre corner from your row crop that you're leasing the ground from, when those leaves get ready to drop, when they mature towards the end of the summer, early September, whatever it might be right there, if you can get in there and broadcast some of these, especially our cereal grain blends with some brassica and clover components, and broadcast those into those standing beans. Keep in mind, you're not going to get 100% germination because not everything is going to hit the soil and just be in a perfect condition, but you can really double crop a field and have kind of the best of both worlds of greens and grain all right there in one spot without ever having to turn the soil over. Yeah. And so that's to making a plan is probably my suggestion for guys after they get that soil test of where am I going to put this plot and why am I putting it there? Am I just needing a spring and summer nutritional plot, or do I want deer coming to this spot all spring and summer, all fall and winter, because this is also a target hunting area, because people have different areas they plant, some just for destination feeding fields, and some are primarily for nothing but a fall and a winter hunting plot. So make a plan of why you're putting it in.
So with that, obviously, again, we got a fairly broad audience here, and, maybe break it down, from the folks that you talk to on a daily basis, Austin, as a regional breakdown. But what would you say you're recommending for a strategy, for somebody that wants to have a spring plot put in for that summer, nutrition and antler growth, but then they also want to hunt that same plot come November, December, that late season? What are you recommending for folks in the Midwest, for folks in the Southeast, for folks in the Northeast? What's your go-to there? As, of course, a general statement.
Yeah, definitely a lot of variables, but generally speaking, I really want guys to look at what the surrounding resources already are. So if you're in an area that's 90% ag and 10% mass producing trees, then I'm probably not going to look at soybeans a whole lot, because that's already a large part of their diet. You're not really creating any diversity within that food plot that they can't go somewhere else and get. So in that case, I'm going to be very specific about making sure maybe I've got a couple of really hardcore clover fields getting established that they can come and use. We see clover really be, to me, it seems to be very effective in a lot of places, but specifically in heavy row crop areas where there's not a lot of diversity, they just really key in on perennial clover fields. So those can be super effective for the fall and the winter. And then also looking at some cool season annual mixes like Maximum or Deer Radish. If I'm really wanting a late season plot, I'm really going to look hard at Maximum. If I'm really keying in on bow season and maybe going into the rut, Deer Radishes or one of our cereal grain blends is probably going to be a choice. And that works from New York to Alabama and everywhere in between. It's not so specific that you say, I got to plant this for this exact time of year, because they are going to browse on some of it early. They are going to browse on some of it late. But, as a general rule, the main portion of browse that we see on that are going to be at those key times of year. So if you've got a food plot that you don't even mess with until the later portion of the year, because of that's where the deer seem to congregate and really use a piece of property once everybody's slamming shotguns and rifles around you, and your place kind of becomes a sanctuary. Well, if you got late season food to couple up with that, then you may be stealing some other people's bucks. Mm-hmm. So be specific about what you're going to plant for a reason, not just because you've heard it's good. But if your place is only huntable during the early season, then key in on cereal grains, radishes, clovers, things that really work well during the early part of the year.
Good point. And, a lot of these blends and things are chosen because they work equally well in different parts of the country.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. But you can definitely strategically plant different things in different areas to have the effect you want.
Yeah. Make the deer be where you want them to be at for a reason. Just don't go up there and throw plots around, just, hoping something comes up. And another thing I try to tell guys when they're putting these plans together is if you've got 10 different plots, don't do 10 of them halfway. Do 3 or 4 of them 100% and make them right. You'll be more happy. We sell seed, but we want to see you succeed. We don't want to see you just throwing seed out there and 1 or 2 of your plots do okay. If you've got 10 fields, but you can only afford to soil test, lime, and fertilize 4 of them, then do those 4 right and get the results you're looking for instead of doing 10 or 12 of them halfway.
Yeah. The remainders, a lot of people are getting into wildflowers and things now. You can disc it and create a disturbance and get a lot of tall weeds and things like that. And you may be able to do a lane in it that's green.
Well,
And then the rest of your fields, like you're talking about, you can just really do it right.
yeah, and I've gotten to be, and you mentioned earlier the kind of the old field management practices of creating natural food plots on the property. If your budget doesn't allow you to plant every opening in food plots, that's very normal. But make those other open areas work for you. Make your acreage work for you. And so these areas that you don't plant, remove the undesirable species, remove the low quality hardwoods, whether it be with cool season disking or herbicides that are specific for removing woody browse and encouraging the natives there to take off using prescribed burning. If you've got a 10-acre field that you turn into what I like to call a fallow field, meaning you aren't planting it actively, but you are managing it, you want to talk about a hardcore bedding and escape cover.
A big old blackberry thicket.
It's where the deer want to be. It's where your quail will want to be. If you've got some, your turkeys will nest there, because we're not just creating deer habitat, we're creating wildlife habitat. And so let's
touch on some of those more native habitats. And first I want to say for folks looking for that giveaway link, we're going to drop that giveaway link in the chat and the QA right now. So make sure you follow that link, fill out the information so you get entered for not only the Native Nursery gift cards to put all this knowledge that Austin and Dudley are sharing to use, but also for the onX swag giveaway. So that link is coming. Make sure you fill it out. It's only going to be live until midnight tonight. So make sure you fill it out ASAP. Just click on it. It takes 30 seconds. But kind of spurring off of that, you talked about fallow fields there, Austin, and maybe folks not having the resources or the bandwidth to really give a full effort on numerous food plots. What's a little bit, less involved ways that folks can use, maybe native grasses and flowers and some of these other types of forbs that folks can plant for longer term on maybe larger tracts? What can folks do to improve that native vegetation that's going to attract deer? Like government programs? Do you guys have Biologic have some stuff? Just generally speaking, what are some folks, what can they do?
Man, yeah, the possibilities are almost endless when you start talking about that stuff, because there's so many, there's just hundreds of varieties of natural native forbs and grasses that are beneficial to wildlife. I mean, let's face it, they were doing really well before man ever started messing around and trying to manipulate them. So we're trying to make sure we're making a piece of dirt better than it was when we got it. And so if you've got a piece of property, whether it's your granddad or something that you bought or a hunting club, and you've got some places you want to manage, but not putting them in a particular food plot, the first thing I would say is go identify what you've got.
Yeah.
Go see what these open areas are, or if it's got a lot of trashy trees in it, go identify them, see what it is. If you're in the Southeast and you've got a bunch of openings like that are kind of growing up with saplings and stuff, I can almost tell you what you're probably going to end up seeing. It's going to be sweet gums and tulip poplars and blackberries. And there's going to be some good stuff there, but there's almost always going to be, if it's been unmanaged, some type of undesirable low quality hardwood bush or something that's created somewhat of a monoculture to kind of take over that area. And
if it's had cattle on it, it probably has, some type of non-native, what I call cattle grass, Bahia, Bermuda, fescue, brome, Timothy. None of those are good for wildlife at all.
Yeah.
Or insects for that matter.
And they're very easy to manipulate and to change those and to put them back in something desirable for wildlife. You just have to put a plan together after you identify what you're dealing with, whether you're going to be using, some type of mechanical equipment first to get rid of it, or herbicides, fire, cool season disking. A lot of that's going to depend on what you have at hand and what you identify is there, because what we want to do is create diversity. We don't want a 10-acre fallow field that's 65% sweet gums, 25% tulip poplars, and the rest of it's nothing but blackberry.
Right. And then, the human mindset has always been to make it look aesthetically pleasing for other humans. Mm-hmm. And that's not what animals want. Our uncle always wants to go out there and bush hog all the fields every year and all the roads. That's not what the deer want. That's not what the quail want. They want it to be 4 foot tall ragweed and goldenrod everywhere. there.
That's right.
And then in that, you can, like I said earlier, you could mow a strip and plant something green in it. Every field you own doesn't have to be a green food plot. It can be wildflowers. You could plant native grasses, all the different blue stems and Indian grass and switchgrass.
And speaking of that, Dudley, how intensive is planting that stuff? Is that easier where you can go out there and broadcast, or is that something that takes a little bit more work?
It really is easy. You just have to put your patient hat on, and be willing to wait 2 or 3 years, or maybe spend a year prepping it. So, for example, you've got a field that's, full of cattle grasses. You probably need to spend the first part of a growing season, like a spring and summer, spraying a herbicide that's going to take it out. And then once those non-native invasive grasses are gone, then you can focus on getting your natives back in. Or some of them are in the seed bank and they can just come back. It just depends on the state of the soil, how much it's been abused and for how long. I'd like to think that you probably need to plant a few species, and then you have some in the native seed bank that are going to come back. Or you could see what's in your seed bank first and then make an assessment whether you're going to add more or not. But it's really easy to do. Some of those native seeds are fluffy. They have like a fluff on the outside of the seed to help it be carried in the wind. And you may have to rent a special seed drill for something like that. There's even a company that makes an attachment for a blower that you can put the seed in, and then you can take your blower out there and spread it around. And it's really not that hard. You just have to be patient. For example, most of the time when you're planting native grasses, like little blue stem or switchgrass, it may not get but a couple of inches tall the first year, and you have to get down on your hands and knees to actually find it. Yeah. It's not until about the third year that it just looks good. So you really just have to manage your expectations. Doing it is pretty easy. There's extension publications all over the place that teach you how to do it. A lot of these old forums. Now there's Facebook groups everywhere where people are establishing natives. It's not as hard as we think it is in our minds. It just takes a little bit of prep work and patience.
And there's so many good species that are already in your soil, in that soil profile that are waiting on their opportunity. We have to get rid of the stuff that we've encouraged to grow there over the years through, cattle practices, or, letting fields grow up to a point to where they're almost bulldozer or mechanical type work, because we've let low quality hardwoods or whatever it might be take over. And so we have to get it back to a point to where it's manageable. And then you can see those species that are within the soil flourish.
Right.
Sometimes it takes some herbicides. Sometimes it takes a couple of fires. Fire is probably one of the cheapest tools that we can use, and a lot of people are scared to death to use it. But I'm telling you, it is the biggest thing you can use for immediate change on a piece of property, is burning off old fields, burning off pine plantations, heck, even using fire to go through hardwood stands that have come unmanageable because they're not at a stage for timber, for taking away any timber yet with any real value to it. But it's full of young, undesirable species that can be set back with a fire, or set back with herbicides, so that you're taking that low quality out of there and allowing other things to flourish. So a lot of good stuff. No matter where you live at, there's good native stuff there. You have to be the one that changes what's there, because of what we've done. Like you said, by bush hogging the same areas over and over, all you're really doing is encouraging more and more grasses to grow, and less and less diversity, because the species that like that are going to continue to grow, and the ones that don't like it are going to continue to kind of fall away.
And if you're in a hurry and decide to bypass that part of getting rid of the invasive grasses and things, just think like a baby turkey. You're 2 or 3 inches tall. It's really hard to wade through that and find what you need. But if you're that tall, thick field that a human can't walk through, and those bad grasses are gone, those little baby quail and rabbits, they just have a network of tunnels, and, it's wide open to them. And so you've got to make sure and get rid of those before you get going.
Yeah. And just to end that portion, I would say that one of the reasons that some of that to me is so effective these days is because there's less and less of it now than there's ever been.
Yeah.
Row crop farmers are having to farm tree line to tree line. There's not any thickets within fields. There's not any, not a lot of waterways anymore that are filled up with all these different wetland species, because they're farming, like I said, tree line and tree line, fence line to fence line, because they've got to make as much of a crop as possible. So if me and you have the 40 acres next to it, and we've got a couple of fields that we're trying to manipulate and turn into, non-food plot, but food producing fields and cover and escape cover, stuff like that, I think you make a bigger impact with it now maybe than you used to have, because there's so much less
big
of it.
time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, habitat loss is definitely no joke these days. So we're definitely coming up near time. So I want to cover a couple more things. And the first being, what are things that you guys are doing to better your properties in the next month? Be it spring plots, be it, putting in some native grasses. What are things that folks can be doing this next month to really improve their properties?
Typically what I do this time of year, once turkey season is over, I'm usually going around my farm and maintaining some trees. So that's typically when I do some weed control around the base of all of my trees. I like to put salt out for my deer, so I can get camera photos of them. And I may do a late burn or two. Thankfully this year I had a neighbor that didn't take the class and was burning some trash in their yard, and I got a free burn, so I don't have to fool with that. But I do a lot of tree maintenance this time of year. I'm putting out my salt. I'm moving cameras to different areas because I know the deer are going to be honing into the salt. I can tell you what I'm not going to be doing is bush hogging. There's poults that are going to be hatching. And I'm still trying to be quiet when I'm going around my place at this time of year, because there's going to be a bunch of little baby animals running around that I don't want to scare. If I'm in a state that still has a trapping season, I'm probably going to be trapping some predators, some nest predators. What else are we doing?
Yeah, just really finished up with the majority of our burning for February, but definitely still some warm season or growing season fires that you can use, especially to set back really tough areas of low quality hardwoods. Definitely mineral sites for sure. Spring and summer food plots are fixing to be in full swing. The soil's kind of warming up everywhere except for maybe where y'all were just at turkey hunting in the snow. But spring and summer food plots are fixing to be coming on strong. And hey, if you've got a field that you don't plant until the fall, soil test it now. Find out right now what you need to be doing, because if you do need lime on your field, right now is a good time to put it out so that it can be working on that soil and doing its job. That way, when the fall rolls around, you're already ahead of the game. Your soil has started healing, so to speak, and that acidity has started getting neutralized with your lime. And so making plans for the upcoming, fall growing season, if you don't have a lot going on for spring and summer.
Planting native grasses and wildflowers, it's go time on that. Doing burn down on your spring food plots if you're going to do some kind of beans or corn. In a lot of the parts of the country, that's coming into full swing. Your pond temps get above 60 degrees. If you want to fertilize your farm pond, for your bass and your brown, now's the time to get started on that. So lots of stuff we can be doing.
Awesome. Well, we're going to drop the giveaway link one more time in the chat. So if you haven't entered yet, go enter that. And then the last thing we're going to do here, Austin, Dudley, if folks from this webinar want to pick your brain on, be it food plots, be it planting native grasses, where can they reach you, and what are some resources that they should go poke around and check out?
I would definitely be amiss not to recommend checking out our Gamekeepers magazine. it's quarterly. It's 150 pages every month of pretty hardcore habitat info. It's not about killing deer. It's about creating better habitat, whether you're putting structure in a bass pond, doing timber stand improvement, planting food plots. We try to keep a pretty wide diversity of stuff in there, from guys that maybe they don't have a ton of letters behind their name, and that would be me and you, but people that have been doing this for a long time and get a lot of dirt under their fingernails. So it's a really good resource for the everyday guy. And I say it all the time, whether you got 20 acres or 20,000, we want to be a source of applicable content for the average guy, because we are the average guy, and we want to help people make their property better depending on what they're after. And so that would definitely be a resource. And then obviously you can always email us, dphelps@mossyoak.com, Delano@mossyoak.com. All you got to do is Google us. I'm sure you'll find us.
There's also a contact us link on the Native Nurseries and the Plant Biologic page. Any of you guys that win the gift cards, don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we'll help you figure out what to get.
Yeah, definitely reach out to these guys. Check out Mossy Oak's biologic pages. Check out their native nursery pages. You can find both Austin and Dudley there. There's a couple questions on the magazine. So again, as an onX Hunt Elite member, you get the Gamekeepers digital magazine for free. If you want a hard copy of that, I'm Mossy Oak Gamekeepers, Google that, and I'm sure you can find that magazine to show up on your front door. So everyone, we really appreciate you guys coming out. Austin, Dudley, thank you for the immense amount of knowledge you guys were able to share, and best of luck those still chasing turkeys, and get out there and improve the habitat for the critters running around on the ground you get to hunt.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Jared. Thanks, onX.
Thanks, everyone.
Hope to see you at the next trade show.